my thing is, I'm just asking you if you have any questions about Russia. Oh, I see one question. That's awesome. So, and then I'm gonna answer it to the best of my ability. Yes.
What would they not want? What would, let's say, the people that you fled from not want you to talk about?
Oh, so basically the question is, what would people in Russia who do not want me in Russia be against me, talking about? Well, I guess basically anything besides, Putin is so great, Russia didn't start this war, there are Nazis in Ukraine. So anything outside of those topics, or like how Europe is, like a servant to United States, and how United States is a puppet master behind everything what's going on in the world. So outside of these topics...
Other way around.
Hmm?
The other way around, right?
What?
The other way around, right?
Yeah. But that's a narrative of Russian propaganda. So if I'm gonna talk about anything besides those things, they don't want that. Yeah. Also, yeah. Sorry, it's like probably sounded weird. It's like, holy shit, what's up with this guy? Yeah. So basically, these were the key topics of Russian propaganda that they're using. And the interesting fact, I know a lot of, I would say, leftists, but kind of a radical leftists or tankies, who have this narrative that that's the ultimately NATO's fault, like in this war, and they still kind of talking about it sometimes, which I think is really, first of all, it's playing Putin's side, basically, because this is his whole story behind, like why I did that. So, just to note, like those people on the left who are talking about this, they're wrong. Yeah. Yes?
First, добрый вечер, как дела?
Nice. Привет, хорошо.
Sure, хорошо. I want to know, I've never been to Russia, so I want to ask you, from moving there to moving here, I don't know when you moved here, but when you moved here, what are the biggest differences from your life there and here?
Well, I moved here 5 years ago, and I know it's gonna sound kind of dumb, but the two things, well, one thing is more metaphorical, like the air of freedom. Also, like New York, it's pretty windy, so it's kind of pretty fresh. My hometown, Yekaterinburg, pretty polluted. So it's like, the air of freedom.
Even in New York.
Yeah. And the second thing for real, well, it is, freedom of speech, which is a great thing to have, like...
There's no open mic? Is there an open mic in...
No, there are open mics in Russia, but like the topics or even songs they can sing on those open mics, very limited, especially now. We have a lot of artists left Russia or be banned in Russia. There are I think some of them who left Russia now being, criminally charged with, like dishonoring Russian army or something. Yeah, so only we have one guy, his name Yuri Shevchuk, he's the leader of the band called DDT, with DDT in Russian. He stays in Russia and he's very anti-war, and he's kind of so badass that they charge him with, some of these new laws in Russia. There are a shit ton of new laws in Russia that prohibit to talk about war, to call it a war, to say anything about Russian army, to anything about anything basically. He still does that. They charge him, and then in St. Petersburg, his city where he lives, no judge agreed to prosecute him, which is pretty badass, I think. But okay, it's a little bit diversion from the question, but yeah, the freedom of speech it's a cool thing to have. Yeah. Yes.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions that Americans have about Russia right now?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think the first thing that's the this leftist narrative that NATO is to blame for this war. That's like a, but it's not widespread misconceptions. Like I would say, pretty contained inside this kind of, like this small-ish political group. I'm not talking about all people on the left. I consider myself to be a little bit on the left as well, as my background being born in Soviet Union allows me to. So other misconceptions. That's a good question. I think basically people just not misinformed, but for example, New York Times, they have their own angle of like looking at things when they report in news. I don't have questions about it. When they talking about, there was like this article I think from last fall about Russians who gentrifying Kyrgyzstan, sort of, which is, yeah, because people are fleeing Russia, they go to these countries, the rent prices go up. That's happened, but also people are fleeing from mobilization and war and political persecution. So, and another thing, which is that's for an, we talked about this on our channel actually, that in United States, race is a big thing historically, and this angle, people understand, just like that, because it's like, yeah, we know what you're talking about. That's why I think a lot of media outlets in the United States focusing on like ethnic issues within Russia. I'm not saying there are no ethnic issues, but we don't have the history of, like a long history of, institutionalized racism or something like that. It's not like we're, all furry and fluffy and all that. We are kind of xenophobes. But we don't have this concept, institutionalized concept of, like one race being, superior, another race being inferior. Not like that, because we don't, historically, because we didn't have that. It's a little bit different dynamic right now. But again, when media outlets talk about this here, they kind of using this angle to be more, more understandable. I understand that. But I think it's a little bit shifting focus from what's really going on, because in Russia it's more or less everything is about class. Yeah. So, yes.
Who's gonna win the war?
Ukraine is gonna win the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the question of time and, price of lives from both sides, because, like now Putin just throwing more and more mobilized people to the front line, and, like people who are not volunteers, who just mobilize, it's a tough ethical questions, like what, like I still sympathize, but I don't want them to die, basically. I don't want anybody to die, but it's gonna happen. The question is like how long it's gonna last, and from now it seems like it's gonna last longer, probably, because, peace is not possible. The only thing that can change things drastically on Russia's side is nuclear weapons, but I don't think it's gonna, I hope it's not gonna happen. I would say like the threat of the nuclear war is, I mean, it's not very likely. I mean, it was supposed to be a joke, and kind of, I was like, I'm gonna say something in the end, something uplifting, and the thing will be, well, I think the nuclear war that will destroy the world is not very likely. It still might happen, but I see a lot of, hope I lift your spirit. We have, I'm out of time, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, well, I'm gonna be back next time.
Yeah.
So please come back, ask me more questions. Thank you for having me, ask me more questions.